you talk to us about the Young Lord's position paper on women? Sure.
So before I talk a little bit about the position paper on women, I really would like to call in, I see this as this panel and what we're doing today as legacy. It's continuing a legacy of struggle that came before us, that included us, and that is continuing to move forward with the various organizations and the various struggles that young people, which most of you in here are continuing. So with that said, this is around legacy. And I want to just take a moment to really acknowledge my parents, because I came into the Young Lords through my parents, yeah? I came into the Young Lords when I was 17 years old, and my father was working with unions. My uncle was working with unions. I come from a very social, politically active family. When we were young people, we were going to demonstrations and rallies and protests. So I have somewhat of a different history than many of the other sisters that are on the panel, yeah? And as a result of that, as Minnie was talking about, I was sort of lost, and my father said, I want to take you up to the People's Church, because there are people up there that I think that you would connect with, right? Have been doing a lot of work in my community in Red Hook projects from Brooklyn. And so I walked in after having been engaged in a lot of community and social activism in the civil rights movement, in the Black nationalist movement. I walked into the People's Church and I was like, whoa, these are my peeps, right? These are my people. And that was it. That was it for me. There was this, this energy and this excitement and this resonance that this was where I belonged, that this was my purpose, right? At 18 years old, that this was my purpose to fight for social justice and to fight for my people, right? For equal rights and opportunities. So I wanted just to acknowledge that history and that legacy, because it continues on in my daughter as one of the Young Lord babies as well, and it continues on with my grandchildren and with the next generations to come. And so with that said, so I joined the Young Lords. I was 18. I was a student. There was a big student movement called the Puerto Rican Student Union, and I was really undecided whether or not I wanted to stay in student organizing or be in the Lords. After having gone to the People's Church and having such an enlightening experience and being very community-oriented, I chose to leave school and to join the Lords full-time. Because I was from Brooklyn, like Minnie, she was from Chelsea, I was from Brooklyn, we chose to work out of the Lower East Side branch. So I was in the Lower East Side branch of the organization for a year. But as we were talking and listening, oftentimes people say, wow, what was it like to be a Young Lord? What was a day in the life of a Young Lord? And as Denise was saying, it was 25 hours a day. So even short periods of time felt like long, long stretches of our lives, right? Totally committed to doing the political work of the organization. With that said, there was, I fell in love with another Lord from the Philadelphia branch, and at that point there were no women in the leadership in the Philadelphia branch, and I was asked to leave the Lower East Side and go to Philadelphia and fill in as a woman in leadership there. And of course I said yes. I wanted to be with my man. But the other piece of it was that I really felt like I was being given an opportunity, right? An opportunity to make a real significant contribution as a woman, as a leader in the organization. This position paper on women is really important. It was in a really important document, as Denise was talking about earlier, the Women's Caucus had been developing, and the platform of the organization had changed, and the sisters were really fighting to make sure that there was a very clear ideological foundation, an ideological position, right, that was very specific to our position on women in the Lord's. One of the things that I think we touched on a little bit that this paper talks about is that when we really believed very strongly that in order to change and to make a new society, that we had to change ourselves, right? That our thoughts, our beliefs, our behaviors, all the messages that we had internalized from society, all the messages that we had internalized culturally about what it meant to be a man, what it meant to be a woman, right? What our roles were. All of these things had to be changed. And so the position paper really talks to this very specific focus, which is that third world women have an integral role to play in the liberation of all oppressed people, as well as the struggle for the liberation of women. Puerto Rican and black women make up over half the Revolutionary Army and the struggle for national liberation, and they must be pressed for the equality of women. The women's struggle is the revolution within the revolution. Puerto Rican women will be neither behind nor in front of their brother, but always alongside them in mutual respect and love. So again, the position paper takes a very strong position that, unlike other organizations, that the role of women in revolutionary struggle is right beside our brothers. That it's not about men being the enemy. We understood very early on that we were dealing with a capitalist society, right? We understood very early on that the oppression of women was systemic, right? We understood very early on, as this position paper talks about, that we were one with all our sisters around the world. As Olguie, as all of us were saying, we were international in scope. Just think about that. I mean, when I was reading this paper the last couple of days, I'm a professor, right? And so when I was reading this paper, I was like, damn, this is some good stuff. This is some good stuff, right? And to think, I mean, the context, I think, is really important. We were young people writing this, understanding this, analyzing this, from the past to the present to the future. That's what this position really speaks to, right? It speaks to what was happening with women in India, right? In these marriages, these arranged marriages, that when they were divorced, they became the property of the brother, right, if the husband died. It speaks of the machismo, and in Latin America and in Puerto Rico, you know, the culture, the very, very traditional, culturally ingrained definitions of the roles of men and women. It speaks of what was happening in other third world countries. You know, so early on we understood that our relationship is a global relationship, is an international relationship, is a sisterhood, right? Now, here's the thing. We were so young. I'm saying we were young. And if you understand that how young we were to really be able to begin thinking about what it means to transform, these culturally ingrained ideas and messages. I mean, it took a lot of commitment, it took a lot of willingness, a lot of openness, and essentially a lot of sacrifice to say, okay, hey, listen, we're here, we are committed to making this change and to do it alongside our brothers, and for our brothers to do it alongside of us. And this position paper was really important because it was published first of all, it was published in Pa'lante, right? So if it's published in Pa'lante, then it's out there in the community. We go out into the community, we're selling these papers. We're not just selling papers like, okay, here, like Siempre Pa'lante. We're talking about the issues that exist within the paper itself. So that this position paper generated lots of conversation, generated lots of discussion, not only within the community, but within the movement, right? Within the movement. And I think that that's a really important piece, because there were many organizations that did not take the same position that we took around men and women's equality and women being revolutionary partners in the struggle, right? As Denise was describing earlier. The other piece about this was that within the organization, this position paper was a way of politicizing ourselves. We as women, as members of the organization, we have political education classes every week, right? So everything that was happening ideologically and everything that was happening in terms of our understandings of these issues was something that we were discussing as a cadre, as a collective. One of the things that Minnie said that I think is really, really key is that these position papers, the Pa'lante newspapers, our position on machismo, our position on prostitution, right? In this position paper, we talk about how prostitutes, the issue of prostitution is an issue of economic exploitation and sexual exploitation, right? We talk about and take a very strong stand on abortion, understanding that, as Olguie was saying, right, understanding that our women, poor women, that third world women in our community needed to have access to safe abortion, right? So we took positions on women in this position paper that became the fundamental ideological, the fundamental theoretical, the fundamental way in which the Young Lord stood in its position toward women. The last piece that I want to just talk a little bit about here, just not even talk about it, but the Central Committee of the Young Lords Party issued this paper to explain to our brothers and our sisters that the role of sisters in the past and how we see sisters in the struggle now and in the future. We criticize brothers who are macho and who continue to treat our sisters as less than equal. We criticize sisters who remain passive, who do not join in the struggle against our oppression. We are fighting every day within our party against male chauvinism because we want to make a revolution of brothers and sisters together in love and in respect for each other. And that was what we preached. In love and in respect for each other. It was a process. It did not happen overnight. The reason why I was so blown away by this paper when I was reading it is because these issues that we talk about in this paper 45 years ago apply today. They apply today.
Olguie Robles wants to intervene briefly to add on to Gloria's comments.
When Gloria was speaking, I was also thinking about what Denise says. It's really important for anyone who's starting to organize. The thing that held us together, that helped us to transform ourselves, those who took it seriously. Because you will have people who take things in, they take it and absorb it, they digest it, they live it. And then you have people that could work it with the mouth, and that's as far as it goes. I'm saying that if you are organizing today, what helped us, our general meetings, we did criticism and self-criticism. At first I was afraid because I felt like nothing, so I figured if I say anything about myself, I'll disappear. But I realized that no, I wasn't disappearing, I was building. I was building more self-concept, more understanding, a better me. I'm saying this to say, You can have your general meetings. You can read your papers. You can have your political education classes so that you can transform. It didn't happen, like she said, overnight. It happened through a process of constant personal work. And we did work 24/7, as Denise said. So I just wanted to interject that because it's real important.
Right.
This information that we're disseminating that was 45 years ago are more than needed in this current time. But it's also more than needed for us to transform. Because if we do not change ourselves, nothing changes. Positions are changed. People may be oppressed by their own people. It may not be an Anglo who oppresses you, but you will continue to be oppressed because you have not transformed the ideology and the practice. And that's it. I'm
Edie's, can you talk to us about the Women's Union, what it was, what was its importance, and can you give us a sense of its 12-point program?
Sure. First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out. To me, really what it indicates is that there is an interest in movement building. And I'm very happy to see that. Because in 40 years, there have been ebbs and flows, as in every social justice movement. So this is a particularly happy moment because people want to get back and fight. I think people are saying, we're just sick and tired of being sick and tired. I often get asked, what motivated me, just like the other sisters get asked the question, and it's always hard for me to answer that. And so I've done a lot of thinking about it over the years. And I think most recently what I realized is that the day I was born, I was a disappointment to my father. I was the firstborn woman, female, and my father was the firstborn of the firstborn of the firstborn of the firstborn of the firstborn son, always males, so he told me, and so I broke the chain. And so I think from the moment that I was born, and I come from a very traditional family, didn't come from an activist family, a very poor family, a family of the migration probably, that a lot of people here can relate to. My father was an elevator operator and my mother was a garment worker, and they instilled beautiful values in me, but I had this thing with my dad because I was not ever good enough and I could never be what he wanted me to be. So I think I became a person that overexcelled, but also a person that hated injustice and that hated being put down for being a woman. So very early on, I was a feminist. I was a feminist in the Young Lords. I was one of the proud co-founders of the Women's Caucus. And everything that my sisters here have spoken about happened before what I'm going to talk to you about. So it means that when we got to 1971 to create the Women's Union, I was assigned the section to build this organization. I was building on everything that you already heard. So I was building on the position paper. I was building on our experience within the organization, because the Women's Caucus was an internal advocacy organization. When we began in the organization, we were not equals. It was be seen and not heard. And so we had to come out of that position of invisibility to create something. And in 1971, we really entered the second phase of the Young Lords. Most people know the early history, but 1971 is when the organization decides to go to Puerto Rico. I'm not going to get into that story. That's a whole other story for another time. But I will say that part of the strategy of moving to Puerto Rico was to build up the people's organizations, what we called people's organizations within the United States. So people's organizations were organizations like the Health Revolutionary Unity Movement, organizations that were very strong organizations in the community organizing. The Health Revolutionary Unity Movement was organizing hospital workers, primarily women that had started to organize, and very visionary organization because they were saying, we need to bring together patients and workers because the patients and the workers are the same. The same communities that we're living in and going to the hospitals is the same place that we're working. So they had very revolutionary ideas. The Puerto Rican Student Union. The Puerto Rican Student Union organized all across New York, all of the campuses in New Jersey, primarily first-generation Puerto Ricans that built this organization and was responsible for Puerto Rican studies, for bringing faculty of color. You know, as has been pointed out, none of that existed. None of that. We used to try and pull little pamphlets together. I was in charge of political education, so we used to try and pull little pamphlets together just to find anything on women. So we had some things like the politics of housework, things like that we found, which were revolutionary because by the time we started to organize the Women's Union was everything that we had learned we were taking out. And we were going to organize women in order to increase the participation of women of color within the social justice movement. That was our aim. So we went out to the community, we started organizing, and that means door to door, that means meeting in the basements of churches, of housing projects, and we attracted lots of women, because young women liked the idea of equality. Young women said, you know, that's cool, I really like that. And we said, join us. We said, women have played a role in every movement since the beginning of time. Women have changed society since the beginning of time. But women have not always gotten the credit, or women have been excluded or marginalized, or after the success is reached, then women are put to the background. The same thing with the race issue, because the issue of gender equality and race are interconnected. You can't have a society, you can't have revolution, you can't have change if you have racism and if you have sexism. Imagine it. You can't. So we said, okay, we're going to organize a women's union. Who came? Young women, primarily in their 20s, housewives, mothers with young children, students, high school students, college students. And because this was an external organization, we started to work with other activists in the movement, with the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, with El Comité, with Resistencia Puertorriqueña, Justicia Latina, with a lot of the Puerto Rican organizations. And we said, you know, this is a big problem in the ranks. This machismo shit is big. So now we have to deal with it, because what the other sisters have said, the first thing that we knew is capitalism is the root cause. Capitalism is the root cause. We're here dealing with Band-Aids. Capitalism is the root cause. We were looking at what is the root cause. We said capitalism is the root cause. So we have to change the system from the bottom to the top. Secondarily, our brothers are infected with sexism. Our brothers are infected with sexism. We have to educate them. We have to work with them because they are our allies. We were never anti-men, never.
That's right.
But as Gloria said, they have to transform. And I point this out because I think this framework for analysis that we developed in the Women's Union applies not only to sexism and the contradiction of gender equality, but it also applies to an analysis about race, capitalism, and then the racism that we have within our own community, right? So we've got to educate. The third thing, which I think applies to both, is what we called our internalized oppression, because we were also infected with capitalism. We grow up in the society, we watch the TV, we want to be those white ladies. You know what I'm saying. I didn't mean it to come out like that. Sorry. We're infected with it. Las novelas. The problem is still with us today. People are talking about it like novelas, like it's a current problem. We've been dealing with this shit for a long time. But think about it. So there's 3 levels of struggle that we analyzed that we needed to deal with. And this is young people, young women. And we put out a newspaper called La Luchadora, loosely translated, woman fighter, right? And we put out 3 issues. It was a woman-oriented newspaper. We sold it for 10 cents. And we had articles in there like house slave, sexism, machismo, full pages, women in welfare system. So, and I want to share the 12-point program because I was looking at the 12-point program again. You know, I've been studying a lot of stuff about the Young Lords, and as Gloria said, the 12-point program, I think, has a lot of relevance. So rather than tell you about it, I want to read some of the points. It was 12 points. I won't read all 12. But what I would like to do is a call and response. Okay? So I'm going to read the point, and if it had relevance today, I want you to put up your hand. If it has relevance today or to you, put up your hand and hoop and holler some kind of way. Okay? So just make some noise, right? So this is the Women's Union program, 12 points, okay? Developed by these young women, primarily from El Barrio, multiracial, all right? Multi-ethnic, right? So I'm going to read you the point, and as I said, put up your hand and hoop and holler. We want equality for women, down with machismo and sexism. Number 4, we want full employment and equal pay for all women with, wait, I'm not finished. For all women with daycare facilities provided by the work institution. All right, you needed to wait because that was just half of the demand. Daycare.
Yeah, that was in the position paper too.
Yeah. 6, we want an end to the particular oppression of prostitutes and drug-addicted sisters.